In this video, I'm going to show you how to graph this frequency distribution for the GPS device price data. One type of graph of a frequency distribution is called a frequency histogram, or simply a histogram. A frequency histogram is a bar graph that represents the frequency distribution table. The horizontal scale is quantitative and it measures the data values. The vertical scale measures the frequencies of the classes. On your frequency histogram, consecutive bars must touch unless you have a class that has a frequency of 0. So bars must touch, and your bars are centered at the class midpoints, and the bars will always connect at the class boundaries. So to sketch a frequency histogram for the GPS device price data, it's fairly simple. I'm going to use these 4 steps here. On step 1, I want to locate and label class midpoints along the x-axis. You could begin by locating boundaries. I'm going to just go ahead and locate midpoints. So we probably ought to go get midpoints. Let's do that now. So here's the frequency distribution. Each one of these classes has a midpoint. The first midpoint, or the midpoint of the first class, is just found using the midpoint formula. So we're going to do 59 plus 114 divided by 2. We're summing up the class limits of the first class and dividing by 2. This is using the midpoint formula. We're getting 86.5. So I'm going to go ahead and make another column here for midpoints. First midpoint, 86.5. Okay, so to get the rest of the midpoints, we could do as we did before, just sum up the class limits and divide by 2, or we can recall that class midpoints are separated by a distance equal to the class width. So the class width for this frequency distribution is 56. One way to verify that is take any 2 consecutive lower class limits and subtract the smaller limit number from the larger limit number, and you'll see that we're going to get the class width. You can do this with any consecutive pair of lower class limits or upper class limits. So that means to get the next midpoint, or the midpoint of the next class, just need to add 56 to 86.5, and we're getting 142.5. We don't want to round midpoints up, so go ahead and add 56 to 142.5. You'll get the next class midpoint is 198.5. Add 56 to 198.5 to get the next class midpoint, 254.5. We're going to add 56 to 254.5. Get the next class midpoint, 310.5. Okay, keep on adding class width to your midpoints to get the next midpoint until you've got all of the midpoints you need. Okay, so there should be one midpoint for each class. Here I've got 7 classes. I need 7 midpoints. Got to get 2 more. So I'm going to add 56, or add the class width 310. Bam, getting the next class midpoint. Okay, so we've got all of our midpoints, and what we need to do, begin to sketch the graph, locate and label these midpoints along the x-axis. So what I'm going to do is, first midpoint is about right here, 86.5. And I'm going to put a broken line in here. I'm going to put this in here, which is called a broken line. And this is commonly done. I'm doing this to let my reader know that I'm just smushing this horizontal distance between 0 and 86.5 into this little area here, this little horizontal area here. So bring out these midpoint lists, list of the midpoints here. Midpoints. Okay, here's the midpoints I need to locate along the x. want to make sure these midpoints are evenly spaced, so they should have roughly the same distance between them. Okay, once we've done step 1, go ahead and go to step 2. We're going to make tick marks at the midpoint between each pair of consecutive midpoints. So we're going to go ahead and find, here's 2 consecutive midpoints. Just going to put a tick mark in there, a smaller tick mark, between every 2 consecutive midpoints. And what we're doing is we're locating the class boundaries. Now we don't need to label what numbers are represented at these ticks. We'll just make the tick marks to locate our boundaries. These are the locations where your class boundaries are, and of course the class boundaries are the location where your histogram bars will connect. So your bars of your graph should be centered around the midpoints, and they should connect at the boundaries. Okay? So if you take a look at the first class frequency, it's 5. So I want to draw now a bar with a height of 5. So we want to go ahead and scale the frequency axis and label the frequency axis with the word frequency. If you notice in our table, the largest frequency is 8. So I'll just go ahead and scale the graph like this: 2, 4, 6, 8. So the first class frequency is 5. I'm going to draw a bar whose height is 5. And that bar should be centered around the first class midpoint. Second class has a frequency of 8, so we want to draw a bar whose height is 8, and that bar needs to be centered around the second class midpoint. Third class has a frequency of 6, so we'll draw a bar with a height of 6, centered around the third midpoint. Frequency of the next class is 5, so another bar height with 5. So histogram bars are always centered at the midpoints, and they connect at the boundaries. So you can see I went in there, did step 3. Step 3, I sketched a bar for each class. The height of each bar needs to equal frequency of that class. And again, histogram bars are centered around class midpoints, and histogram bars connect at or touch each other at the boundaries. So now we'll go ahead and finish here by doing step 4. Make sure to label the X and Y axis. The proper way to label the y-axis is put the word frequency on there. And you want to label your variable along the x-axis Don't just put the word midpoints or don't put the word in boundaries. You want to give your reader an idea of what the data is. You're graphing the units. So I'm just going to write on here GPS device prices in dollars. What do the numbers along the x-axis mean? What are the units? Well, they're dollar amounts, right? Okay.